All right, this is going to be like a full take video. I'm just going to sit here and talk to the camera for a moment. That probably means this will be too long. Also, I do wear this hoodie every day. If you see it, you're like, you're like, does this guy wear this hoodie every day? Yes, I do. I had a comfort blanket slash baby blanket when I was little, and now I have a comfort slash baby hoodie, and I call it my happy hoodie. I actually never have called it that before. I'm gonna start calling it my happy hoodie as of right now. Well, reason I'm jumping in here, this is a little earlier than I usually do videos, but I had a couple conversations related to the text from Paul where he challenges us or maybe encourages us to look at suffering a little bit differently than maybe we typically do. Had some conversations about that yesterday after the video, and so I thought it might be helpful to share some gained perspective or reflections just that came out of that conversation. Maybe this will be meaningful to you, maybe it won't be. So Paul says that because he is someone devoted to Jesus, when suffering comes into his life, bad experiences for him, you can read the New Testament and see he has lists and lists of bad experiences that occurred to him. And as someone who is devoted to Christ, and as someone who is suffering worse than most anyone we know suffers, he says, I, as the sufferer who's devoted to Christ, look at my suffering that I'm going through. He's not an outside, he's not a philosophy, he's not just showing us a philosophy of suffering, a theory of suffering. He's saying, as someone who has suffered and is suffering significantly and is devoted to Christ, I look at my suffering as beneficial because I see that it's helping the gospel proceed. Now let's back up a little bit. A couple thoughts. One is, if you're not in that group, someone who is pursuing the advancement of God's kingdom, someone who's devoted to the cause of Jesus, then this text probably is not going to mean a lot to you. This is not a global ontological viewpoint on suffering. This is a viewpoint for those who are pursuing Christ. So this is not a good argument for overcoming the problem of evil. This is not a good argument. It's not a good apologetic for defending how a good God could allow bad things happen on the earth. That is a conversation for a different time. And quite honestly, I'm probably not the most equipped person to have that conversation. I enjoy it, but I am not as intelligent as many other great thinkers who have this conversation. I would highly recommend looking at the videos of Gavin Ortlund if that's something you're interested in, hearing a very well thought out, honest, humble, compassionate perspective on from a Christian thinker. He's on YouTube. He's probably everywhere. He's on Twitter as well. And yes, this is in reference to a specific conversation. So if somebody's listening to this who was part of that conversation, don't hate me for bringing this up. I think other people may have the same thought. Like, no, this is not a very good defense or explanation for suffering for everyone in every situation. This is Paul as a sufferer, a significant sufferer, how he provided an explanation to himself for his suffering. This is how he got through it. It doesn't make it true or not true that his perspective, just philosophically, it doesn't make it true or not true that his perspective was this. It just is Paul's way of saying, here's how I got through it. So if you already agree with Paul that Jesus is the reason for life, and you're already devoted to the cause of Christ like Paul is, and you believe God is in control already, then you will look at your suffering differently. This text won't help you get into that category. It'll just help you if you are in that category. Hope that makes sense. The second conversation I had is that when you're sitting in your desk and you're looking at all these Greek words and Greek texts and you're just doing your little Bible study thing, it can come across as a bit smug when you encourage people who might be suffering to kind of just like buck up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It may have felt that way, right? Like Paul's challenge, Paul's a crazy radical lover of Jesus. And so sometimes Paul's life feels like it's unattainable. That's what it feels like to me sometimes. And others feel that way too. And if you're going through suffering, you may read a text like this paragraph in Philippians, or may have watched the video that I shared yesterday and been like, man, I want to say bad words to you right now. And that would have been fun. You could say bad words to me. I hope, though, that you also see that this example from Paul comes after a very clear description of where his strength comes from. He said it's God who will finish the work that he started in us. God is the one who does the work. He says that the fruit of righteousness that God demands from us, it comes from Christ. We don't do it. We don't create it. We don't muster up or discipline ourselves or strengthen ourselves into having the power to do what Paul is describing. Later in Philippians chapter 2, it says God is the one who works in us. I'll just give you the old King James version because it's like what I memorized a million years ago. God is the one who works in us, both the will and the do of his own good pleasure. He gives us the desire to do what's right, desire to do what his will is, and he gives us the strength to do it. I know that I said I'm not going to get ahead too much in this study process. I just want to let the text kind of unravel before us. But as I've been reading through the book of Philippians over and over and over, just so that I start to understand how this whole idea and this whole literary structure is put together. And it helps me a lot to understand the text that way. I'd highly encourage you, if you're doing Bible study, just to read the Bible, read the book that you're studying over and over and over and over, and get a pen or a pencil and like mark up all the connections you see. But a major idea, much bigger than I ever thought it was, as I have read Philippians in the past. This careful reading has led me to be convinced that a major thesis of Paul, argument of Paul, principle that he presents is the reality that it's Jesus himself, who is God himself. He makes this very clear. That's his theology. Jesus himself, that's God himself, that is working inside of us, creating a life of service, love, kindness, compassion, and, like we see from Paul yesterday, radical joy, even in the midst of suffering. Don't look to self. Don't look to your own strength. Don't try to muster the emotional shifts and energy that you need to feel good about going through suffering. Ask Jesus to miraculously give you the perspective that Paul had, a perspective that allowed him to have joy as one of the greatest sufferers that the world has ever known.